The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. We're mesmerized by technology, two in particular, AI and Bitcoin. And while we may have this fascination with them, we are unaware of the unintended environmental consequences associated with these technologies. Alex Vries, the founder of Digiconomist, did wonder about those consequences, and he set out to look at two of the biggest energy sinks that technology has created, AI and Bitcoin. He says they're energy pigs. They eat up valuable electrical energy and generate tons of carbon emissions and electronic waste. According to Digiconomist, a single NVIDIA DGX A100 server can consume as much electricity as a handful of U.S. households combined. Because of this, the electricity consumption of hundreds of thousands of these devices will add up quickly. By 2027, worldwide AI-related electricity consumption could increase by 85 to 134 terawatt hours of annual electricity consumption. This figure is comparable to the annual electricity consumption of countries such as the Netherlands, or Argentina, or Sweden. I invited Alex Vries of Digiconomist to join me for a conversation that matters about the unintended consequences of digital technology consumption. Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
What made you start to say, hang on a second here, yes, this all looks wonderful on the shiny exterior outside, but what is the story behind the story when it comes to electrical consumption and the impact on the environment? What led you down this path?
Yeah, I once started going down the rabbit hole back in 2016 when I first read an article myself that said, hey, a single Bitcoin transaction is already consuming as much power as a US household typically consumes over the course of 1.5 days. And I was like, okay, for something as simple as me sending you money, something's really going wrong there. It can't use that much power, but let's see. I thought that this was at least something people should be aware about if this is really going on in the background. And when I was looking into it, I couldn't find any source of information at all. So that's when I decided to just start providing that type of information myself. And throughout the years, I've been following, first of all, the development of the energy consumption of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular. I was just talking about 2016, but especially since 2018 and the 5 years afterward, that became a very significant consumer of electricity worldwide. Just the Bitcoin network alone consumes as much power as all data centers in the world combined during the past decade. That's just Bitcoin. So now, recently, we started to see the rise of artificial intelligence, and I was like, hey, here we have another energy-intensive technology which may have a similar path going forward simply because of, by design, in AI, bigger is better. If you are making AI models, it's generally true that if you make them bigger, they will be more robust and they will perform better. But equally simple, the more you put in a model, the more resources it will consume and the more electricity will be needed to run those models. So that dynamic in itself is already fundamentally incompatible with environmental sustainability. If you think of it from a climate perspective, we need less power consumption, not more power consumption, but here we have something that is naturally growing and growing. So that's when, after years of looking into energy-intensive digital currencies and all kind of other factors that relate to energy consumption, like carbon emissions, electronic waste, water consumption, I figured, okay, now it's time to look at these indicators for artificial intelligence, because here we have yet another technology which is going to grow really rapidly. And then indeed, from looking at the projections for how many of those servers are going to be manufactured in the coming years, you can indeed start to see a similar growth trajectory emerge, whereas in a couple of years, AI-related electricity consumption will be as high as where Bitcoin-related electricity consumption is today. And if you add it all up, then we are really doubling, or more than doubling, our total global data center electricity consumption in a relatively short period of time, not even including yet the growth in regular data center hardware because of these new technologies.
So let's go first of all to electricity consumption and its relationship to the environment. And keep in mind that Bitcoin and AI data banks are based around the world in different jurisdictions. What's your main concern about the way in which the electricity is produced that fuels these data centers, or in Bitcoin's case, data mines?
Yeah, so I think taking a little step back, we first of all have to realize how energy grids operate. We are already in the middle of a energy transition. We are trying to go green, which means that we are, whenever it's possible, we are prioritizing renewable energy over fossil fuel-based power. But a big problem is that the share of renewables we have on our grid is also generally limited. So if you look at the US, I think, I don't have the exact number, but I think over there a quarter or less is coming from renewables and all the rest is coming from fossil fuels. If we are pushing up our electricity demand in any type of way, and then this is independent of what way we're doing it, but if we're building energy intensive applications like Bitcoin or artificial intelligence, then what that means is that that additional power that we require is not going to come from renewables. Those are already in use. We already prioritize those, and we're going to be using the backup power source for that, which is fossil fuel. So we're going to be using more coal and more gas somewhere, maybe not for AI directly, because we often see that big tech companies will also buy green energy directly, but then it just means that somewhere something else is going to be powered with fossil fuel. So on the whole, we will be using more energy, we will be using more fossil fuels as a result of that, and then will be more carbon emissions as well. Next to other factors, the more electricity consumed, also the more water you need, while we are facing increasing water scarcity around the world as well.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So, you estimated tons of carbon output from electric generation in connection to Bitcoin. It's quite a staggering figure. How much is it, and how did you come to that conclusion about the volume of carbon that's produced by electrical generation just to drive Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, it's carbon accounting is always debatable, but what we can do in Bitcoin's case is we can look at where those cryptocurrency miners are located around the world, and then we can look at the energy generation or the energy mix on the locations they are settled in. So, for example, if we see that a big chunk of miners is operating on the grid in Texas, in the US, then a big part of that is going to be powered by, coal and gas, simply because that's how they run the grid. Given a certain breakdown of where these miners are located around the world, you can start to figure out how their energy mix looks like, and in turn, what that means in carbon emissions. So if you establish that a majority of that power is being sourced from fossil fuels, of course, that's going to lead to a pretty significant carbon footprint on the electricity consumption number we previously mentioned. So actually today, my estimate is that the Bitcoin network is responsible for 87 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. And to put that in a context, that is more than a country like Greece would emit in total If you think about electric vehicles, we are avoiding a significant amount of carbon emissions by using electric vehicles all around the world every year, compared to using vehicles with internal combustion engines. But we are only avoiding up to 60 million tons of carbon dioxide every year from all the electric vehicles around the world. And at the same time, Bitcoin is responsible for more than 80 million tons of carbon dioxide. So just the Bitcoin mining alone is responsible for enough emissions to completely negate all the gains from electric vehicles around the world. That's a really significant number.
Certainly is. You also mentioned water consumption. For somebody who's unaware of what that connection is, explain how water becomes part of this equation.
Yeah, well, it comes in two cases. First of all, when you are loading up your data centers with these Bitcoin miners, they need cooling, and your cooling equipment, depending on how you set it up, will need a certain amount of water to function. And when I'm saying need a certain amount of water, in this case, we're talking about the water consumption. So, of course, you will take some water and put some water back, but as you're cooling, part of the water evaporates and becomes unavailable for reuse, and that is the water consumption part. It gets lost due to going up in smoke, literally. And that happens on site.
Yeah. I also should note that water vapor is the most prevalent greenhouse gas there is. So you're adding more water vapor to the atmosphere, so it also has another atmospheric consequence.
It all stacks up in the end. And when it comes to cryptocurrency miners and data centers, only 20% of their water use is direct. The majority of their water use is actually indirect. When we talk about carbon emissions related to AI or cryptocurrency miners, we talk about the carbon emissions related to the power generation that those machines ultimately consume. But in the same way, the power generators also require a lot of water. If you're generating power from fossil fuels, the generators also have cooling systems in which water is evaporated. And also when you're using hydropower, a lot of water evaporates from the hydropower reservoir, which is also attributable. So that also adds on top of the electronic waste. And if you look at the numbers, in the case of Bitcoin, the amount of water that evaporates in total every year, both direct and indirect consumption combined, you're talking about as much water as a country like Switzerland is using. And it ultimately comes down to the equivalent of a backyard swimming pool worth of water per Bitcoin transaction on average, more than 16,000 liters. Now, depending on where you are, that might not be enough to fill your swimming pool, but it's a staggering amount regardless.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. The other thing that I found interesting that you noted, of course, is that the intensity of use on all of the computer parts that form a Bitcoin mine burns this electronic hardware out pretty quickly. So there is an enormous amount of electronic hardware waste. What are your estimates on the scale of that?
Yeah, and well, actually, I have to add that in the case of cryptocurrency mining, you're dealing with equipment that is so specialized that it can't do anything else but do that very specific task. So Bitcoin miners can only mine Bitcoin. And the problem is that those machines improve at a very rapid pace. So the unfortunate thing is their economic lifetime gets very short. They won't last more than a couple of years. And that's already if you're lucky, simply because they get obsolete so fast economically. They just can't compete with newer versions anymore. And I previously estimated that the whole Bitcoin network combined was also putting out as much electronic waste as my home country, the Netherlands, puts out in small IT equipment waste every year. And you're talking about 29 kilotons of electronic waste. And again, that averages down to an iPhone's weight worth of electronic waste per Bitcoin transaction on average. So every time you're doing a Bitcoin transaction, you're talking about about electricity consumption, the size of what a US household now requires for more than a month, has 16,000 liters of water and an iPhone worth of electronic waste, and let's not even get started on the carbon footprint of those transactions, because that in itself will also exceed the carbon footprint of a per passenger carbon footprint of a flight from Amsterdam to New York.
I managed to visit a Bitcoin mine a couple of years ago, and it is massive amounts of computers that are just running in one row after another, after another, after another. The requirement for cooling in that environment is so high, and just the heat is such a negative and strong force on the long-term sustainability of that equipment. Everywhere you look, it is a big energy draw. So here in British Columbia, where there have been a couple of Bitcoin mines that have been set up, partly because we're in a northern environment, so you get cooler in the winter, the main power generation organization here, called BC Hydro, has put a moratorium on bit mining in BC. But I also found it interesting from your work that China has done the same. Do you anticipate that we're going to see more countries saying we can't afford to have Bitcoin mines?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've also seen something similar in Sweden. And well, actually, I must add that in Sweden, there's a more general negative sentiment versus data centers, not just cryptocurrency miners. In the end, they suffer from the same problem, whether it is a regular data center or a cryptocurrency miner. These type of facilities, they don't contribute a whole lot to your local economy. They don't generate a whole lot of jobs. They do require a lot of power to operate. In the case of crypto mining, it's 24/7 non-stop. So that capacity that you're using never becomes available again. So if you need it, well, tough luck. You need to get it somewhere else. This is also part of responsible grid management. You need to be able to serve the peaks. You can't just give it away to cryptocurrency miners. But yeah, I think more countries are realizing that this is just a massive opportunity cost to have this type of facilities around. They cost a lot of power that you can put in other things. So in Sweden, for example, they said like, okay, we can put it into cryptocurrency mining, but we can also offer it to steel manufacturing, which is a lot more labor intensive. We get something back instead of machines making useless computations that are just thrown out immediately and no one ever has any use of that. So they don't serve to attract any other business. There's no reason why you would want to be near a cryptocurrency mine or a regular data center for that matter. It doesn't help to attract other types of businesses. In fact, most people want to be away as far as possible because it's also the noise on top of all the other problems. So if you're near those mines, it's really bad for anyone's sanity living near those things. So it will be increasingly difficult for anyone trying to set up this type of facilities to find locations to do that, as more and more countries are turning against it. I just saw the other day that Iceland is also cutting miners from their grid because they're like, okay, we want to put it into food, agriculture instead, not waste it on making useless computations instead. So as more countries do that, they might find it increasingly difficult to find a home.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So one of the other things that I found interesting in your research is you compared what, in essence, the ROI is on a Visa transaction and how many of them happen annually in the world versus what the ROI is on a Bitcoin transaction, which is very limited in the number of transactions that can be generated. Share some of that information for us, please.
Yeah, when you're looking at Visa, you're talking about a very efficient company serving lots of people around the world, high volumes of transactions, and actually managing that with only 2 data centers. So they're working very efficiently. if you ultimately look at it from a carbon perspective, in the case of a Visa transaction, you're talking about milligrams of carbon dioxide per Visa transaction, whereas in the case of Bitcoin, you're dealing with a network which can only do a handful of transactions per second to begin with. Visa can do 65,000 per second if they have to. Bitcoin can do 5, and that's it. It doesn't have any capacity, and as a result of that, even it does have a carbon footprint which is much bigger than the entire financial system combined, not just Visa. Bitcoin mining has a carbon footprint which exceeds the entire financial industry combined. So all bank branches, ATMs, cashless payments, all combined, and you still don't get to the number for which Bitcoin is responsible. A single Bitcoin transaction has the carbon footprint equivalent to that of 1.5 million Visa transactions. That is the difference.
So just in the last couple of minutes that we have here, I also indicated that AI is a growing energy sink. Where do you see a possibility that maybe AI can figure out its own energy consumption challenges, or is that wishful thinking?
I would say it's very wishful thinking, because fundamentally, bigger will always be better in AI, and that is just not going to be compatible with environmental sustainability. The only thing you can hope for is that at some moment, some model like ChatGPT will become the most dominant one, and the competition has no interest in making the models bigger anymore, and also the main company itself, like the OpenAI behind ChatGPT, starts losing interest in making the models even bigger just because they don't have to. There's no pressure to. But other than that, I don't think that's desirable even. From a competition point of view, you don't want to have a monopolistic player like that. So if you want to have a healthy market, combining that with AI is going to be difficult, because AI, it will always require more. People will always want to make AI models bigger, because in the end, you make yourself unique from your competition through the model you're offering. If you offer the very best model, you will attract the most users and ultimately the most revenue. That's the idea. But it also means that you have to keep investing more resources in making those models even bigger to begin with, and there's no easy way out there.
Well, and also if you take a look at big tech companies, they may go, okay, we're not going to be a large language platform, but we're going to use artificial intelligence to improve the services and the software that we have to give a better experience or better outcome for our subscribers or users. And so I don't think we're going to be able to stop this expansion of AI. And as you pointed out, the NVIDIA chip is power hungry.
Exactly, indeed. And ultimately, there will be some benefits from AI, of course, but that this comes at the price of this technology just being very energy intensive in the background. And then on top of that, the energy efficiency gains that we do manage to realize, if we make certain goods and services more efficient, and we manage to make them cheaper, it is also not necessarily going to offset the extra energy use we use in the background, because increasing efficiency and making goods and services cheaper can also lead to increased demands. And we often see rebound effects where ultimately, as a result of making goods and services cheaper, we end up using way more than what we started out with, which just comes on top of needing more energy in the background.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today. It's something that we need to keep our eye on and hope that we can find maybe more hopeful changes in the way in which we're developing technology. Thank you.
Very welcome.